the whole thing. I'm only here to support you.
Good evening, everybody. Hello, we're just going to start to get started. If everybody wants to take their seats. We're getting to start. Hello, everybody. Good evening. You can't hear me? They can't hear me. Over to her. I'm pretty close to it. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Is that good? Can you turn up the volume a little bit? Okay. And maybe we can circulate. You guys can circulate a bit and get people to sit down. They're ignoring. Ari, can you maybe circulate? Just circulate maybe and as people start sitting down. Okay, good evening, everybody. We're going to get started. If you could please take your seats and wrap up your conversations. There'll be more chance to have a chat with your friends in the foyer when we're done with the ceremony. Thank you. Okay, are we good? We're good to get going? Yeah. All right. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the 2020 celebration of International Women's Day here at Vancouver City Hall in our beautiful council chambers. My name is Karen Levitt and I'm your MC tonight. I come to you with both a lot of experience and almost no experience, and I'll explain. My lot of experience is I have just surpassed 30 years with the city. I started here in 1990, and I've had quite a few roles over the years at the city. And the little experience comes with, I'm just fresh into my new role as Deputy City Manager. I've been in this role for exactly 6 weeks today. This is my first gig like this in this role, so I'm counting on you guys to help me figure out how to do my job. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here to celebrate with you tonight the many achievements and progress women have made in our local community and beyond. And I just want to start, of course, by acknowledging that we are on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh homelands, First Nations here. Tonight we have Zoe Craig Sparrow, who's a member of the Musqueam Indian Band and co-director of Justice for Girls, and I'd like to invite her up to the front to start us off with a traditional First Nations welcome. Thanks, Zoe. Yeah. You have to be pretty close.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you. I'd like to begin today by saying thank you and welcome to everyone that's here today at City Hall on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Hunkaminam-speaking Hmotquim people. Our people have lived and learned on these land and waters since time immemorial, approximately 10,000 years. As our ancestors have in the past, I raise my hands to all of you to welcome you here today. I'd like to begin by telling you a little bit about myself. My name is Zoe Craig Sparrow, and I was born and raised on the Musqueam Reserve here in Vancouver, BC. I come from a long line of strong women and matriarchs in the Sparrow family. I'm the daughter of Laura Sparrow, who's the fisheries manager at Musqueam. I'm the granddaughter of Susan Sparrow and Ed Sparrow, and I'm the great-granddaughter of the late Chief Ed Sparrow and the late Rose Sparrow. Growing up, I was always taught the importance of strong women and strong matriarchs. Musqueam is a matriarchal society, which means that we are always taught and we teach to honor and respect the women in our lives. I'd like to begin with a little anecdote that one of our counselors, Morgan Guerin, once told me. And it's the reason why it was traditionally our men who would go and fight and defend our territory. And maybe it's the typical gender roles or stereotypes today that make us think that it's because the men were strong and the women were weak that they stayed back. But in fact, as he told me, it was because the men were our first line of defense and the women were our last. So should the men fail and people would break through, it is the women, our warriors, who would be the last line of defense to protect our people, our culture, and our land and territories. So we don't mess with our women. And furthermore, while traditionally it might have been the men who spoke up and spoke out, it was women who were whispering in their ears, telling them exactly what to say. Our women are also our weavers and our storytellers and our healers. And this is especially important considering Musqueam is an oral society, which means we did not write down our history, but rather we shared it through stories and through our art and through our culture, especially our weavings. So we have lots of strong Musqueam women who are weaving today, including my cousin Deborah Sparrow, who's done a lot of incredible work around the city. So today, as we celebrate the upcoming International Women's Day, it's important that we not only celebrate and honor the success, strength, and resilience of women, but that we also look critically at the inequality and oppression that women and girls still face today. And this ties in really well with the theme of this year's International Women's Day, which is Each for Equal. And this is really focusing on gender equality and really not only celebrating the success of women and of the women's rights movement, but also raising awareness and combating gender bias, gender discrimination, and gender-based violence. And now we can't think about these issues and gender discrimination and gender-based violence without looking specifically at the violence and impacts that Indigenous women and girls face, particularly considering the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And in light of the Women's Memorial March 2 weeks ago, it's so important that we think specifically about the impacts and the violence that these women are facing. Our Indigenous women and girls are going missing, are being murdered at alarming rates, and they're experiencing disproportionately high levels of violence and sexual assault. So it's so important that we remember our stolen sisters and that we work towards a better future. I'd like to commend the city on their work to implement the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls' Inquiries Calls to Justice, which are so important, and they really are integral to overcoming this genocide together. And if any of you haven't read them, I really encourage you to do so. And especially considering that, it is really important that we recognize that in this city, while we're working hard to combat this genocide, that there are still 5 minutes away so many stolen sisters in our local community. And in thinking about that, it's really important that we take an intersectional, holistic, and generational lens to all of these issues. In Musqueam, we use a 7-generational lens, which means we not only look back 7 generations, but we look forward 7 generations. So especially when we're working to combat gender inequality and to achieve an equal world, it's important that we recognize and honor the work of women 7 generations in the past, that we recognize and honor the women today, but that we also think, where do we want to be 7 generations into the future? I know where I want to be. I want us to have an equal world where we can celebrate gender equality and not combating inequality. But then I put it to each of us to think, what does that mean? Are we doing enough today to create an equal world 7 generations in the future? We need to do better, and we need to do better together. So on that note, I'd like to thank everyone for having me here today. And I'd like to finish by once again raising my hands to each and every one of you and saying thank you and welcome to the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Hunkaminam-speaking Humathqueen people. Hi, Sepka. Thank you all.
Thank you, Zoe Craig Sparrow. So one of the great things about an event like this is we get to meet some amazing, inspiring, and talented people that are just doing amazing things in the world. And we're about to meet one of those people right now. I'd like to introduce Laura McEnroth, who's going to read a poem she has written called No Path to Party. Laura graduated from the University of British Columbia in 2004 with a Bachelor's of Commerce. For over a decade, she's facilitated the national teleconferences, which are now webinars, for the Registered Disability Savings Plan, a financial retirement plan for people with disabilities. Laura is a passionate accessibility advocate and is the vice chair of the city's Person with Disabilities Committee, as well as the newly created TransLink Handy Dart Users Committee. Please join me now in giving Laura McEnroth a warm welcome. Actually, I'm just going to say one more thing before Laura comes on. Thank you. Just one more thing before Laura comes on. Laura's using technology that involves her listening. So she has asked that everybody be really quiet and not stir around too much while she's reciting her poem.
Did it turn off? Yes, it did. It is wireless? No, can you just put it there? Yeah, okay. My poem has 2 parts, and then I'll be doing a quickie speech afterwards. It's because of the computer. Sorry. Okay, well, I've got a pretty loud voice. Do you want me to just do it without the mic?
Let's try this.
Okay. Part 1. The little girl cries. She's at home, on a couch, watching TV, with tears streaming down her face. She doesn't want to be here. What she wants is to be at her friend's birthday party. She knows it's going on. It's only 2 blocks away. In her mind, she can see all the little girls arriving, walking up those tall stairs, presents in their hands, walking through the balloon-ridged entrance door. She knows they'll have a lot of fun. Cake, presents, laughter, and smiles. But she's not smiling. She's crying. She wants so very much to be a part of this, to join in the activities, the laughter, and the fun. But she can't. She can't move because she's a child with a disability. The wheels of the wheelchair are her legs. But at this party, there's no accessibility. Those tall stairs are the barriers to her fun, to her happiness, to seeing her friends and participating in the birthday party. She knows this is why she did not receive an invitation when all the other little girls in her class got them, but she didn't. This must be it. It's not her personality. She knows that. She's perky and sweet, full of smiles, all sugar. Somehow she had hoped that an invitation would come, that people could get it together, figure out a way to get her through the door, to be part of the party, to participate. But they didn't. They didn't put a second thought to it. It was just easier for them to not invite her. Perhaps they didn't know what to do. Perhaps they just didn't want to ask. Perhaps they didn't have enough strength to be able to lift her up and down those tall stairs. Perhaps they just didn't want to get their carpet dirty from the wheels of her wheelchair. This is her life. Yet, this is so life-shattering. So she's at home now. She's not playing party games. While the other little girls at the party down the street enjoy their balloons and cake and cry out in wonder as they watch the presents being opened, she's alone, at home, sitting on the couch, crying. When will this ever change? When will it ever get better? When will she be able to join the party? Part 2. A quarter century has now passed since the little girl has cried from not being able to go to the birthday party. She's a woman now, and in over 2.5 decades, the number of parties has barely changed. She can almost count them on 2 hands. Somehow she thought that as the years passed, this would have been different. But it did not. No dinner invitations, no birthday parties, almost no celebrations of any kind. No invitations in the mail, no phone call ever received. She's used to it now. Attending only 1 party a year by a gentleman in a wheelchair, and she goes like clockwork. Because this is the only party she ever gets invited to. This is the only home that has a path to the party. Even though a quarter century has passed, she still has the hope that this will change. But will it? Will it change in her lifetime? She's not getting any younger. She knows this. What she once thought would be a lifetime filled with birthday parties, weddings, dinners, and celebrations has become a lifetime of loneliness, solitude, and social isolation. She's less sugar now, and a lot more spice. So the little girl may be gone, but in her place is a woman who still cries. Thank you. Hold on. I was still gonna go. Even though this is Women's Day, and the focus is on little girls and women across the world, I want to say that these issues, which I spoke about in my poems, affect all of our children. They affect all ages, all genders, and all races. However, I am hopeful that changes will be made. And I ask that next time, when you personally have a celebration of any kind, please think of what obstacles are needed to overcome to ensure that all of your family and friends are able to participate. Take a thoughtful look at your guest list and figure out who are you missing. Then make as many changes as you can to include those people. And for those change makers and lawmakers in the room, please consider how we can make our buildings, parks, and of course, our housing more accessible. By removing physical barriers, such as a single step or even a set of stairs, it makes us closer to having accessibility true visibility, and social inclusion. Remember, we are not just doing this for our aging parents, our children, or our future generations. Time marches on. We all get older. It's for all of us. Thank you.
I'll bring your laptop back to your desk. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for that very moving poem and those words of wisdom. It's now my pleasure to call up Acting Mayor Sarah Kirby-Yung to read the International Women's Day Proclamation. In addition to proclaiming March 8th International Women's Day, Acting Mayor Kirby-Yung is also going to present the proclamation to the International Women's Day Event Planning Committee in recognition of all the great work they've done to create this event for all of us. Please join me in welcoming Acting Mayor Kirby-Yung.
Hello, everybody. Hi. I first of all want to just extend another thank you to Zoe Craig Sparrow for an incredibly wonderful, thought-provoking welcome, and also to Laura McEnroe for that thoughtful poem. I think they deserve another hand. Do you want to help me with that? So happy International Women's Day. It is such a pleasure to be here and welcome all of you to our council chambers for the 109th anniversary of International Women's Day at City Hall, together with my council colleagues. And I do want to acknowledge that we are eternally grateful to gather here on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I really want to extend our sincere gratitude and appreciation for that. International Women's Day has originally dates back 109 years to 1911. And I was thinking about that today. That apparently that was when the first gathering was, although the United Nations did not recognize it until 1925, I think it was. But when that gathering happened, think about what was going on in 1911. It was 3 or 4 generations ago. And I reflected and I thought, what didn't women have at that point in time? We didn't have the federal franchise and the ability to vote. And that sort of inspired me wearing this t-shirt today. And for those of you that can't see it, it says, a woman's place is close to my heart in the council chambers, in the legislature, in the House of Commons, and the Senate. And I think that is part of what we have the opportunity to celebrate today. Yes. Because in my view, this is a moment in time where for the first time in the history of the city of Vancouver, we have, and I'd like to say, just before I say this, a shout out to the gentlemen on council who are also wonderful. But for the first time in the history of the city of Vancouver, we have 80% women councillors. 80%. And so I think that carries with it an enormous privilege, an enormous responsibility, and an opportunity to strengthen and champion and really push the work further forward that the city has been undertaking. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that now. I do want to provide some acknowledgements first, and I'd like to recognize some of my amazing councillor colleagues, the women and the men. Councillor Adrian Carr is here, Councillor Colleen Hardwick, Councillor Lisa Dominato, also sporting this wonderful t-shirt. Good taste, Lisa. Councillor Melissa DeGenova, Councillor Jean Swanson, Councillor Michael Wiebe, probably might be hiding in the back there, and Councillor Pete Fry as well. So that comprises your council representatives for tonight. We're also on the federal front, very happy to have the Honourable Hetty Fry, MP for Vancouver Centre, joining us. We're also joined by the co-chair of the Squamish Nation Council, Kristen Rivers, for which we're very grateful. We also have part board commissioners in the House tonight, Commissioner Tricia Barker, Commissioner Gwen Giesbrecht. We have members of the Vancouver School Board, incredibly important, Chair Janet Fraser, Trustee Barbara Parrott, and Trustee Oliver Hansen. Way to go, Oliver, supporting the women. Love to see that. From the Library Board, Vice Chair, which I also sat on, so near and dear to my heart, Vice Chair Raji Manjat and Vice Chair Rhonda Sherwood. There. And finally, last but not least, I think we have almost a dozen consuls in the House tonight. They might want to give a wave. And we're really incredibly honored and grateful to have you take the time to join us this evening. Thank you. So I want to tell you a little bit about some of the work that the City of Vancouver does. And we are working continually to support and improve our work towards gender parity. And I'll highlight a few achievements. But I do want to recognize as well the work of the Women's Advisory Committee, which is really instrumental to furthering this. And we have representatives here, Stephanie, I hope I'm saying this correctly, Amaya, Savannah Norman, Patty Shaw, and Rhonda Sherwood. So thank you. Thank you for everything that you do. So, what has the city been up to with the Women's Equity Strategy? We have one that was adopted unanimously in January of 2018. It's a 10-year initiative that's aimed at addressing those ongoing systemic barriers that are faced by cis and trans women. The strategy does commit the city to apply an intersectional lens to all of the work that we do, and that's something that is a given. We can't take it for granted, and we always need to be asking the questions, but it is something the committee is, or the city, I should say, has committed to ensuring as part of our daily work as we move policy forward. We're also implementing our Transgender Diverse and Two-Spirit Inclusion Action Plan. Both of these are multi-year projects, and really the goal here is to ensure that we provide all women, gender diverse, and Two-Spirit peoples with equitable opportunities to fully participate in the political, economic, cultural, and social life of Vancouver. Last year, Vancouver was really fortunate to host the Women Deliver Conference. It's actually the largest conference on gender equality in the world. I had a chance to go down there. Anybody else have a chance to go and... Yeah, I see some hands in the room. Incredible gathering of really inspiring people and really fantastic topics. The city wanted to ensure that people had access to that, not just within the convention center, but outside of those four walls. And so it hosted a number of different sessions to connect local residents with some of those international experts and make sure they had the chance to enjoy those learnings as well. During the conference, we also ensured that we had a legacy project, which Council had committed to, which is going to be a women's-led housing project and a social services hub specifically supporting for women, by women, and about women. So the theme for tonight's celebration is the power to overcome. And as one does in the morning when you're having your cup of coffee, which I was doing this morning, I was listening to some of the words of Dr. Seuss that I thought were quite appropriate. They happened to come on the radio, and I thought, wow, isn't that a good fit? And they were simply these. And they said, I have brains in my head, I have feet in my shoes, and I have the power to propel myself forward in whatever direction I choose. And I thought that is what women do. Women are resilient, they are strong, they are creative, they are innovative, and they are fearless, and they do that. And I think that all of the folks in this room believe that, and all the folks believe that together we are stronger and we can do that and move that forward. So that's what it means to me when I was reflecting on the power to overcome, is our ability to break down those barriers and overcome those obstacles. I'm almost done, don't worry, we'll get to the exciting speakers. I just want to take a member to thank, and these thank yous are really, really important, the members of the Event Planning Committee who specifically helped with tonight's event. So we have Tasia Alexis, there she is, Stephanie Amaya, how did I do on the pronunciation, good? And Jackie Wheeler. Thank you so much. We really appreciate all of your work. And I'd like to ask the three of you to come forward so that we can do the proclamation and presentation. Do you guys want to stand here with the proclamation? And I will just stand here at the microphone just to read it. Okay. All right. So, whereas International Women's Day is celebrated around the world by those who believe in gender equity and who seek to improve the lives of all women and girls, trans and cis, two-spirit, and gender diverse peoples through cultural, legal, economic, and social change. And whereas events are being held across Vancouver this week to celebrate the contributions that all women make to our city as activists, workers, artists, entrepreneurs, caregivers, educators, volunteers, and leaders. And whereas colonization and racialized violence are intrinsically connected to gender inequities experienced by Indigenous people, Black people, and people of color. And whereas women and girls, in particular women with disabilities, racialized women, immigrant women, two-spirit, and gender-diverse peoples experience many forms of oppression, inhibiting their safety, their job opportunities, health, housing, education, and reproductive rights. And whereas International Women's Day is an opportunity to recognize, support, and celebrate the progress made to advance gender equality. And whereas the City of Vancouver is committed to promoting equity and justice and will continue to work to address the systematic and structural oppressions that perpetuate this inequity. Now, I, Sarah Kirby-Young, Acting Mayor, City of Vancouver, do hereby proclaim Sunday, March 8th, as the 109th International Women's Day in the City of Vancouver. Thank you.
Thank you very much to this committee, all members past and present who've done such a great job bringing this event to our City Hall. Okay, so now, tonight we're going to be hearing from our two co-speakers, Sadie Keene and Barbara Finley, on the theme of Power to Overcome. Sadie and Barbara are going to share with us their personal stories of overcoming, and as well are going to challenge us to personally improve and expand the way we see the world. Sadie Keene is a longtime Vancouver resident who is a writer, educator, and social and economic justice activist in Canada and internationally. In the mid-'80s, Sadie became the first Black person of color to be elected as a trustee to the Vancouver School Board. She was also the first person of color to lead a major municipal party and the first person of color to chair a major civic committee, the Family Court and Youth Justice Committee of Vancouver. Sadie contributes her time and efforts toward building an inclusive and accessible Vancouver by speaking out against systematic injustices, including racism and other forms of discrimination. Barbara Finley QC comes to this event highly recommended by a wide range of people involved in women's issues. Barbara has been asked to be introduced as follows. Barbara is a fat, old, white, lesbian lawyer with disabilities who was raised Christian and working class. Barbara feels all these locations inform the work she does. She has spent her career working against oppression, both in her legal practice and in her work leading Unlearning Oppression workshops. Please, let's give them both a warm welcome.
Hi, everyone. Sorry. We're going to have to pass. Yeah, we could have left it up. Anyway, we're here tonight actually to join in the celebration of all of us. In the earlier talks, there's a discussion of how diverse we are and the need to make sure that there's room and space for all of us in all that we do. That our councils, our workplaces, our school boards, our parks board, and every other entity should be as diverse as our population is. And I believe that we can ensure that that happens because the bigger the pie is, the bigger we can share it, right? There is more to go around. There is always the challenge of folks believing that they are not going to be in the circle and they'll be shut out. The reality is it's up to all of us to make sure that the circle is larger so that everyone can and will be included. That isn't all of what we have to say, but I'll pass it on to Barbara now.
Thanks, Sadie. You guys are going to do the work. This is an exercise. What I want you to do, this is an exercise with no right or wrong answers, you'll be pleased to know in advance. So what I'd like you to do is raise your hand when I call out something that relates to you. If it doesn't relate to you, leave your hand down. And if you don't know, if the question is unclear, if you don't really want to say, you can just raise your hand halfway. All right? All right. This is a silent exercise, but I invite you to look around and see who is raising their hand at the same time as you are and who isn't. What I would most like you to do, though, is to pay attention to how you feel. Okay? Everybody centered in on that part so far? All right. I'd like you to raise your hand if you're under 25. I want you to keep your hand down if you're over 25. I want you to raise your hand if you're over 55. And leave your hand down if you're under 55. If you were not raised Christian, raise your hand. If you were, keep your hand down. If you've ever been called stupid, raise your hand. If you've never been called stupid, leave your hand down. If you grew up poor or working class, raise your hand. If you grew up middle class or upper class, or rich, or whatever they call those people, put your hand down. Now you see, I'm going to stop there, because that was a mistake of mine. And I'm going to come back to mistakes a little bit later. If you or your family immigrated to Canada from somewhere other than the United States or Europe, raise your hand. If you were born here or you immigrated from the US or Britain, keep your hand down. If you have Indigenous heritage, raise your hand. If you have no Indigenous heritage, leave your hand down. If you're deaf or hard of hearing, raise your hand. If you're not deaf or hard of hearing, keep your hands down. If you have a criminal record, raise your hand. If you have no criminal record, keep your hands down. If your first language is not English, raise your hand. If your first language is English, keep your hand down. If you've ever been sexually assaulted or harassed, raise your hand. If you have never been sexually assaulted or harassed, keep your hand down. If you have a mixed heritage, a mixed racial heritage, for example, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, black and white, whatever, raise your hand. If your ancestry is of one kind, keep your hand down. If you didn't finish high school, raise your hand. If you did finish high school, keep your hand down. If you identify as transgender, raise your hand. If you don't identify as trans, if you identify as cisgender, keep your hand down. If you've ever been institutionalized, prison, foster care, residential school, psychiatric hospitals, raise your hand. If you've never been institutionalized, keep your hand down. If you or your family do not currently have status in Canada, raise your hand. If you and your family have status in Canada, keep your hand down. If you've ever experienced racial harassment or assault, raise your hand. If you've never experienced racial harassment or assault, put your hand down. Keep your hand down. If you've ever worked in the sex trade, put up your hand. If you've never worked in the sex trade, keep your hand down. If as a person of color, you have ever experienced shadeism, mistreatment because of the hue of your skin, raise your hand. If you have never experienced shadeism, keep your hand down. If you have visible or invisible disabilities, including, for example, HIV, dyslexia, anorexia, ADD, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, mental health disabilities, environmental sensitivities, raise your hand. If you have no disabilities, keep your hand down. If you have difficulty reading or writing, raise your hands. If you have no difficulty reading or writing, keep your hand down. If you are Black, including mixed heritage, raise your hand. If you're not Black, put your hand down. If you identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual, pansexual, or any other except heterosexual, raise your hand. If you identify as heterosexual, keep your hand down. If you are currently or have been unsheltered, raise your hand. If you've never been unsheltered, put your hand down. If you are or have been a temporary foreign worker or a live-in caregiver, raise your hand. If you have never been a temporary foreign worker or caregiver, put your hand down. If you are now or have been in the past on social assistance, raise your hand. If you've never been on social assistance, put your hand down. If you have reduced sight or are blind, raise your hand. If you do not have reduced sight, keep your hand down. If you or your family are victims of state terrorism or genocide, raise your hands. If you or your family have not been victimized by state terrorism or genocide, leave your hand down. If you identify as trans, agender, pangender, transsexual, or any other gender variant identity, raise your hand. If you don't, keep your hand down. If you or your family came to Canada as refugees, raise your hand. If neither you nor your family came to Canada as refugees, keep your hand down. If you identify as intersex, raise your hand. If not, keep your hand down. If you are Muslim, raise your hand. If you are not Muslim, keep your hand down. If you've ever been called fat, raise your hand. If you've never been called fat, keep your hand down. If you or your family are or have been addicted to alcohol or drugs, raise your hands. If not, put your hands down. If you have Jewish heritage, raise your hands. If you have no Jewish heritage, keep your hand down. If you are a woman or identify as femme, raise your hands. If you are not a woman or you don't identify as femme, keep your hands down. If you are francophone, raise your hand. If you are English or allophone, keep your hands down. If you're a person of color, including a person of mixed heritage, raise your hands. If you're white, keep your hand down. If you've been victimized by physical assault or abuse or emotional assault or abuse, raise your hands. If you have never been victimized by physical assault or abuse or emotional assault or abuse, keep your hand down. If you are a single parent, raise your hand. If you are coupled and with children, or if you have no children, keep your hand down. If you were a child, raise your hand. If you were never a child, keep your hands down. Okay, so what did you notice? Now I'm putting I have glasses which either work to see or they work to see you, but not both. Look at you. So what did you learn? What did you notice? Yeah, Joe.
Who's been on social assistance? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
Nobody who's been a sex worker, nobody who's been on social assistance.
There have been two. Really?
I think there were some people on social assistance, and there's also some people upstairs.
Oh, okay,
but
the
yes.
people here,
Yeah. So
thought it was really, in some ways, a privileged group.
in some ways, a privileged group.
Yeah.
Under that thought. Anybody else? Gwen. I didn't take account of this microphone issue.
Okay. I had to note that even as our previous commenter said, basically is a privileged group. That's how we all happen to be here. Nearly everyone has had something that has happened to them.
There's a question upstairs. Okay, have you got a big voice? Okay, be a big voice. And so one of the ways of saying that is, we are all some of you, and you are all some of us. And did folks notice a difference between the hands up and the hands down? Jill, did you notice the difference between the hands up and the hands down? You said it. That is, the hands down folks experience social privilege. The hands up folks experience targeting or marginalization or oppression or discrimination or disadvantage because of that particular characteristic. And it's true that all of us, literally all of us, because we've all been children, and therefore in a situation where somebody else was making all the decisions on our behalf, whether we liked it or not, we have all been in the position of not having social power. And as adults, we are all, at least in that one respect, in the position of having power over other people, children. Oppressions are not all the same. And anyways, Sadie, why are we talking about this when it's International Women's Day? Surely this is something different that I'm doing. I mean, you know that sometimes people don't like to say Barbara Finlay is a fat, white, old, because why would you not want to say that? Because even saying it communicates disapprobation, communicates, I mean, nobody says of another person in polite company that they're fat, right? So why is that? Why is that?
I think that people think that it's bad manners, but in fact, lots of people do say that we're too fat, or we're too thin, or we're too loud, or we don't know our places. So I think that lots of things do get said, and they are said not to, basically to have folks not feel so good about themselves.
So I remember back when we were doing organizing in the 70s, we were doing women's issues. And I have to say that as a dyke at the time, a baby, I still am, but as a baby dyke in those days, I wasn't all that welcome in the feminist groups, lest they think that they were all lesbians who were doing the organizing. You know, these days, not so big a deal. But in Vancouver, the point of all of this that we just did is that, yes, we're fighting gender-based violence, and we can only do that if we understand the ways in which that gender-based violence is also embedded in racism and the experience of murdered and missing women in transphobia and the experience of anybody who's gender variant in any way, unless our analyses enable us to think those more complex thoughts, we ain't going nowhere, nohow.
Well, you know, my position is that everything is interconnected and interrelated. The issues around the treatment of trans folks, queer folks, folks of color, folks with limited abilities, is all a part of who we are, and the fact that we all have to make room for each other and make sure that we are inclusive. The challenge for many groups is that different groups are pushed out. We still have a major challenge within the LGBTQ community around folks of color. And it's a real issue, and it's something that we tend not to talk about. And we have to make a change there as well as in other areas.
When in 1992, we were organizing a conference called the Outrights Conference, and the conference organizing committee was a whole bunch of white dykes. And we knew enough to know that it wasn't okay to have only white dykes doing the organizing. So we set ourselves the task of going out and finding some women or men, queers of color, to join the organizing committee. And when we came back the next week, nobody had done their homework. And that really made me think, what was it? And I knew then that what got in my way was the fear of making mistakes. I didn't know how to speak across the differences between us in a way that was respectful and useful, because I was terrified that I was going to say something that you would find to be racist. So, for me, one of the biggest takeaways is to learn to love your mistakes. What do you think?
Life is about mistakes. We don't grow. We don't grow if we don't make mistakes, as far as I'm concerned. And in fact, if we open ourselves up to making mistakes, which is life, we live a much fuller life. If you make a mistake, what do you usually do? You say, I screwed up. Some people say, they fucked up, but I won't go there. But the reality is, you take on the mistakes you make, you own them, and you move on from there, it seems to me anyway.
You mean I shouldn't come and say to you, oh, Sadie, can you please forgive me? I had this terrible experience last week where I said something really racist and I'm really sorry. Can you forgive me? Is that what I should do?
Not to me, please. The reality is, if you made the racist comment to me or in my presence, sure, you can say, oops, I realize I made a mistake here, right? And I want to apologize. And we'll move on from there. So as long as you really mean it, right?
So as a white ally, my job is definitely to undo the grief that and the humiliation I feel from having made that mistake. I did a lot of unlearning racism workshops, and I came to know that the one thing that was absolutely certain was that I would make a racist mistake in the middle of my unlearning racism workshop, and I used to take comfort in that because it made it possible for me then to talk about mistakes. Think about it. In the culture I grew up in, here was the message about mistakes. I am the way, the truth, and the right, and no man cometh unto the Father but by me, on that straight and narrow.
But you heard what you said, right?
Maybe not. What did I say?
No man comes.
All right. Well, I was, before they made the Bible gender inclusive, was right in my youth. Yes, yes. But In fact, that is the cultural norm about making mistakes. You fall off the straight and narrow, you're bad. There's no redemption. If we instead understand that there are as many ways to get from here to there as there are imaginations to think about it, we're less likely to be caught up with a fear of making those kinds of mistakes. What are some of the other dimensions of working across difference as women who are working towards equality that we should think about?
No, I think, honestly, I think the key piece is in terms of life, that if in fact one makes mistakes, and we will, because we are alive, that when someone brings the mistake to your attention, or if you realize you've made a mistake, the most important piece is to own it and make recompense, right? To say, I'm sorry for what I did or what I said, and move on from there. And working together for change is always a good way of moving on together, it seems to me.
Yeah, and some of the other, across those many dimensions of oppression, they're not all the same, but they have lots of things in common. All of the folks with their hands down feel, in relation to the people with their hands up, like we are in some way better situated because they are, after all, disadvantaged. And when we're over here, we know that we are not regarded as being as good as the folks over there. So as a lesbian, I've had to fight for decades for recognition and acceptance as a dyke. As a white person, I have never had to wonder ever if a door in this country was going to be closed to me because of the color of my skin. And the relationship between folks on this side of whatever, and you just saw that there isn't a one-dimensional piece here, but on whichever of the dynamics the oppression operates at a whole bunch of levels. It operates politically. It operates in the education system. It operates in the social systems. It operates in our social groups. It operates between us. And just as it operates at all of those levels, it can be interrupted at any of those levels. There is no one fix for any of it. On the other hand, there's a great aphorism that I wish I could remember, but the point of it is, just because you can't fix it all at once, doesn't mean you shouldn't fix a bit of it. Because taken together, those efforts over time are likely to doing nothing is not. Actually, here's the thing. There's no such thing as doing nothing. Because if you're doing nothing, what you are doing is something bad. You are supporting the status quo on whichever of the issues it is, and you are reinforcing the oppression that. Am I or is it just in my own ear? Okay. All right. Okay. I'm going to give you this. I'm just going to use my voice. Is that okay? I'm just going to use my outside voice. So do not think you have the choice to be not political. I've heard people say, me, I'm not political. Yes, you are. You are, you are, you are. And doing nothing is the most powerful block, the most difficult to disrupt of any of the political positions you might otherwise want to take. So, on that one, anybody says that one to me, I get quite exercised. The other pieces of those dimensions are that if, and to the extent that we're standing on this side of the room, we're afraid. We're afraid of you. We're afraid of your police. We're afraid of your teachers. We're afraid of every institution, every healthcare provider, every place we have to go, because we do not know what we will get when we get there. When we're over here, we expect to be welcomed. We expect that the schools and the hospitals and the governments are made by us and for us, that it understands us, and that we will not be killed. Because humor is what we use in the question is, what do you do when somebody says something racist or sexist or homophobic or transphobic? And you're not one of the people, because you're more likely to hear that if you're not in that group, right? You're always more likely to hear it if you're not in the target group. What do? Ideas. Say something. Say what? I'm frozen. Okay. If you've got it together with your witty and perfect response, go for it. If, on the other hand, you like me, go, I can't believe I just heard that, and the moment passes, and while you're trying to gather your thoughts, this is what my unlearning oppression teacher said to me. She said, well, in that case, stand on the coffee table. Your goal is to interrupt that conversation, and it really doesn't matter. It's great if you can have a conversation, but what are your strategies, Sadie?
In terms of those kinds of things, it depends on what's going on at a particular time. If, in fact, you're about done, I said, if, in fact, we have exhausted that piece, I don't know if we have, I want us to move on and talk about some of the elements of the city of Vancouver that has made it what it is, and how we've grown and how we may not have quite grown that much at all. Can we move on to the quiz? Okay. Is the quiz up? Oh, indeed. We're going to have a little bit of fun, and I'm going to read off some. Oh, okay. I'm going to read off the quiz. I thought it was going to be shown up on the screen, but it's not. I'll read them off, and if you know the answer to them, please just shout out the answer. Wendy Grant John is a noted long-standing chief of what local band? Oh, shucks. Okay. Sandra Wilking. was the first woman of Chinese descent elected to what position in Vancouver in 1988? City Council, indeed. Name the first trans woman to run for political office in Vancouver and Canada, for that matter. That's right. Smart folks here.
Can folks hear the answers? Because I can repeat them if you don't.
What sport did Christine Sinclair play? Anyone know? Yeah. There's a second part to it. It has to do with records, but I won't go into that now. She's number one in so many ways. Eleanor Collins of Vancouver is a well-known what? Jazz singer, actress. She actually was one of the first women to have a TV program on CBC, like way back when. Mae Brown, Darlene Mazzari, and Andrea Raymer all were once what? And Ellen Wordsworth is upstairs, and she should be on that list as well. What sport is Canadian Angela James famous for? Sorry. Did you say what sport is Angela James famous for? Anyone know? Nope. Actually, she was called the female Wayne Gretzky. She actually is a famous Canadian women hockey player, and she was the captain of the Canadian team, I think, for many, many years, actually. She's retired now. Sandra Singh is the current what at the city? Oh, see, I made it too easy. Quiz is way, way too easy for you. Oh, Sandra Singh, what was she? What is she at the city? Exactly. So that is the quiz. I am struck that in fact people are right on top of knowing almost every question that was asked. I'm totally impressed. You know your Vancouver history. So we'll move on, and you want to do the rest.
So I would like to ask you, Sadie, given the invitation earlier to look forward 7 generations, what do you see as directions that you want to go in the future? Where do we need to go?
It's a big question and not so big question. Where I want to go is what we've all been talking about all night, it seems to me. And that is that I honestly have always believed, for those folks in this room that know me, that know that I've always been committed to working with as many people as possible to build a just, fair, inclusive society for everyone, where everyone could be valued. You and I talked about where I grew up in the Deep South. And most people have this view of the Deep South as being this weird, terrible, problematic place, and it is in some cases. But it is the place where I grew up knowing that I could do and be absolutely anything that I wanted to be. That the people around me that was there for me, from my Jewish godmother to my grandmother who raised me, and all of my aunts and uncles, all had me know that I was a special person and that I could be whatever I wanted to be, and that they would support me to actually be able to do that. And the reality that the people in that community, regardless of their sexual identity or sexual orientation or the color of the shade of their skin, knew that they were a part of that community and they too were supported by community no matter what. And for all of the nasty stuff that happened, that there was always a circle of people around that supported us, protected us, and pushed us through and made sure that we were able to make it. And that's the kind of environment and world that I look forward to having for absolutely everyone.
So I think my own answer to that question would be that I think that first of all, I was taught nothing about the land that we live on and what it means that we are but visitors, and I grew up educated in capitalism. More is better, higher is better, and that to achieve the kind of, I think of what you've told me as acceptance at home, and home doesn't necessarily mean the people you grew up with, but home where you are. Home where you are. I want everyone to be able to feel home where we are. I want everyone to know how to make everybody else feel home where we are. And in moving forward, unless we move forward in a way which respects the land we're on as an urgent crisis priority, everything else is going to go, we're not going to have any other problems. And unless we do those things, along with, in partnership with, and taking leadership from First Nations people, we're not going to get there either. So for me, I think one of my biggest lessons was learning 7 generations back and 7 generations forward, because it transformed the way I looked at and thought about the world and the 1 minute that I occupy here on these in this planet. And for all of us who face gendered oppression and violence as part of our experience in the world, we absolutely require the we are homeness that you talk about. So here's to all of us learning how to make and share and be at home with each other and caring for the land we live on for the next 7 generations.
For sure. Thank you all for being here.
In these days of viral protocols, no more handshakes.
Okay, thank you, Sadie and Barbara. Really appreciated what you had to say. I heard in and among what you were saying a couple of, or 3 really interesting sort of tensions or spectrums. A lot of talk about oppression and the opposite of that being acceptance and respect. Our personal experiences full of challenges, unique challenges that some of us have had, offset with the strengths that each of us have, and the stories of isolation and marginalization being offset with the very positive note you ended on about community and love and friendship. So thank you very much. That was a great speech. One more round of applause for these guys. Before we bring tonight's event to a close, I'm very pleased to invite McGirl up to perform 2 songs for us. McGirl is an ensemble of Indigenous women with stories and songs about the gifts received from Mother Earth. While they've been officially performing for over 15 years, their musical histories and cultural practice spans throughout their lives. The message in their music is an emergence of cultural ideals and worldviews from their perspectives of Métis, Cree, Anishinaabe, and Saulteaux cultural backgrounds. Tonight we have here with us Tiara Laporte, Tracy Witzel, and Renee Morisseau. I'd like to join me, please, and welcome them to sing a couple of songs for us. From the Okanagan, and I want to thank the Coast Salish, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh for allowing us to share our music and our stories here on the traditional territories. Yeah. I always forget.
The song, and it's been called the Strong Women Song. So all of you, strong women, and those of you who made them strong women.
That was fantastic. Thank you, McGirl. Okay, we're at the end of the formal part of the evening tonight. I'd like to just wrap up by thanking everybody who organized this evening and everybody who participated this evening tonight, and for all of you for joining us. So one last round of applause for everybody. Thank you very much. It's been a great evening, and we're going to carry on now out in the foyer. There's some refreshments, and you can hang out and socialize. And just want to thank all of you for being here tonight. And let's go enjoy out there. Thank you.